Welcome back to Rewitched, a charmed 1998 rewatch journey. I'm your host, Jess Sabanko, and I can't wait to share my thoughts on one of my favorite shows with you. I'll be keeping these recaps spoiler-free and welcome fans new and old to join me on my journey here and on social media at Rewitched_pod on Instagram and TikTok. Currently, I'm on season 6. All right, so this week we're talking about season 6, episode 15, I Dream of Phoebe. So in terms of our innocents and villains of the week, we do have Jinny, the genie, who starts out as our seeming innocent, but ultimately turns into our villain when we find out she's actually a demon. Our innocents of the week would be Phoebe, and then obviously the sisters as a whole. So in terms of where we start out with our sisters' storylines, with Phoebe and Chris's storyline, they're very intermingled in this episode. We see that for the last week, Phoebe has been trying to get in touch with Chris because she's very stressed out about having to keep this secret of who she now knows he is. And then we see that Chris is very stressed because he's been seeing all these fortune tellers and soothsayers and oracles who are telling him that this is his conception month. So if he doesn't get his parents back together or get them to hook up in the next few weeks, he's going to disappear forever. So his storyline for this episode very much revolves around trying to get his parents to sleep together. Which is so funny and really plays into the high comedy of this episode. Like, it's very, very funny. And it's kind of like, Chris, like, this is so weird when you think about it outside of the context that if this doesn't happen, he'll never be born, right? As for, like, what goes on with them, we see a lot of struggle where Phoebe's like, look, you're the one who broke them up in the first place. Actually, why did you do that? He's like, well, I needed to make room for me as your white lighter. And she's like, well, you know, normally when a kid is responsible for their parents' divorce, like, they feel some guilt about that. Whereas Chris is just like, it's all part of my plan. Like, don't worry about it. Except for, you know, the part he totally forgot about was himself in that situation. We see that he very much wants to do whatever it takes to make sure that he is born, whereas Phoebe's like, look, we're not going to reopen these old wounds for Piper and Leo. They've started moving on. They're doing better. We're not telling them anything. And then we start to see that obviously Chris is struggling with this throughout the episode. He's willing to try anything to make sure it happens, whereas Phoebe's like, look, we'll figure something out, but we'll figure it out my way. But then by the end of the episode, we do see that Piper and Leo have connected, and Phoebe tells Chris not to give up hope on it, that there may still be a chance of him yet. And I definitely agree, but I will get there when I talk about the Piper and Leo of the episode. The other thing Chris does in this episode that's really funny is he's constantly trying to, like, prevent Piper and Greg from hooking up, which is a hilarious storyline in the fact that, like, Piper's entire storyline this episode is that Greg is about to have a 3-day shift and she's trying to get it in before, like, she can't see him for 3 days. Chris calls this out. He's like, wait, she's on a date with Greg, the fireman, the one she's insanely sexually attracted to? And then, like, trying to, like, prevent them from being together by being really rude and weird in front of Greg. And we see that Piper is just like, this is none of your business, Chris. Because obviously Piper has moved on from where she was at in the last 2 episodes where she was really focused on only Wyatt. Now she's back out there dating and trying to put herself back out there, which is something she was struggling with early this season. So I'm definitely happy for Piper in that aspect, though obviously things are not going to work out with Greg because Chris does ruin that for her at the end of the episode when he shows Greg that Leo and Piper are cuddling while they're knocked out. We also see that for Piper and Leo, there are these moments of connections where Leo's supportive of her being out with Greg. He even says, like, we've both moved on, like, our lives are continuing from here. We also see that the two of them do get along really well in this episode, and we've seen their relationship growing throughout the season as co-parents, so I do like seeing that and the continuation of that within their storyline. I also really enjoy the way that Leo in this episode is so funny with Chris. And then, of course, we do have those moments where Leo cares for Piper. When Piper is unconscious and killed, he is able to hear her and heal her. And for me, that's very, like, soulmate, like, no matter what, I can't let anything happen to you. And that moment between the two of them at the very end where she's like, oh, like, thank you, like, you saved me, and then wanting to go get Wyatt together is exactly what tells Phoebe to tell Chris that, hey, like, don't give up on this yet. Your parents obviously still love and care about each other very much. And so that there is that chance for them. And I'm definitely interested to see what's going to happen leading up to this moment where Chris may or may not be conceived. In terms of Paige and her storyline in this episode, so this Paige and Richard storyline is very tragic. Richard's struggle with magic has grown. He's doing all these different like conjurings for Paige to send her gifts, which is actually dangerous because could potentially expose magic, though I'm assuming he's keeping track of where she is, though he doesn't know who's around her at the time. He's also saying to her, like, look, I'm doing all this because I want to prove to you, like, that I can use magic. It's not a problem. Like, look, like, nothing bad is happening. But he's very quickly going off the deep end throughout the episode, which multiple people call out. We see that he's very much struggling in terms of like being able to prove that he's fine. And Paige does set up an intervention with his family, many of whom are spirits, by summoning them, though Richard is very unreceptive to this. And they do get into an argument where he's like, I can't believe you would do this to me, and all of that, whereas Paige and his brother are both trying to be like, look, we love you. We don't want to see you go down this path. Like, magic has done so much bad to this family. And then we see that very much Richard is unwilling to hear it. And this moment for Paige really shows a lot of who she is as a character. I think one thing that hasn't come up in a while is that Paige has struggled with addiction non-magically, right? So she knows what happens in situations of this and the dangers that are coming up. She also worked in social work. So these are things that she's dealt with and she knows how, even though she might not be successful early on in this episode. We also see later that she does give Richard an ultimatum. She's like, it's either me or magic. And we don't know which one it is he's going to choose, but it seems that he's very uninterested in the power stripping potion that she had apparently had a conversation with him about prior to this episode. We also see that later on when there is a magical fight and Richard is the one who ends up with the genie bottle, that his goal is to make Paige forget about what's going on with them, right? Get the wording right, get Paige to be okay with him using magic, and then get the family to as well, because he believes that they've all been brainwashed into thinking he can't handle it by Paige. But then, of course, there is the moment where Paige shows up, they get into this fight, and he uses magic against her and hurts her. And we see an immediate shift in Richard after this happened, because I think that that's the first moment where it dawns on Richard just how bad of a path he's down, that he would hurt this person who he loves, the one person who he seemed to want to protect in every other episode we've seen him in. And I do like that immediate shift in him. It's such a difference between the Richard storyline with magic addiction and the Cole one that we saw last season, where that first time that he does something that hurts Paige, he knows that he can't do this anymore. And then, of course, being turned into the genie when he wishes Phoebe free and then having to kill the sisters obviously has a deeper emotional impact that leads to his decision at the end of the episode to give up his powers. And at the start of that conversation between him and Paige, we don't know that he's done this, but we do know very much that he's like, look, I've never had this life without powers. Even when I didn't use magic, it was always part of who I was. And then it comes up with this idea that, like, yes, he loves her, but because he's going down this magic-free path, they aren't going to be able to be together, at least for a while. And that's heartbreaking because Paige knows it too. She knows that when his addiction is to this thing that's such a big part of who she is, the relationship can't work. And it's really sad because I did like these two and I had a lot of hope for where this was going. But I'm definitely curious to see if we'll see Richard back and if things will change for them in the future, or if this is the end of this cute little love story that I was really looking forward to and really enjoyed. In terms of our main storyline with Jinny, so Jinny sends a letter to Phoebe in order to trigger a premonition to get her to come rescue her. She pretends that she is an innocent genie who's been passed around from demon to demon throughout the centuries, but she's actually a demon who was cursed into the bottle, and anyone who frees her would then become the genie, which obviously ends up happening to Phoebe. There is definitely some stuff in this storyline that is problematic and that I don't want to dig too much into. So they do use this genie work as an allegory for sex work in some ways. The idea of her being passed from man to man, the idea of her fulfilling men's desires, demons' desires. That is definitely going on there. We definitely see hints of that, including the way she's dressed, the way that Phoebe is then forced to be so subservient when she becomes the genie. We also do have some potential cultural insensitivities here. They're somewhere random in the Middle East to raise this lost city of Zanbar, which we know very little about, other than the fact that it once housed an evil empire. So Jinny's current master, Bosk, is trying to get them to raise the city. He has these thieves looking for it, and that's really the goal he's going for. Obviously, once Jinny is freed by Phoebe, who at first does not want to be tricked by her, she's like, I am not making any wishes, though she does accidentally wish for Chris not to be able to orb, and then for him to be able to orb again, before finally making the wish to free Jinny, which traps her into being a genie. We find out that Jinny is a demon, she vanquishes Bosk, and then takes over his plan for herself. We see that the sisters are able to trap her in a crystal cage, though that doesn't last forever. And when she threatens Piper and Leo, obviously Chris does lead him to the sisters, who she then kills. In terms of her storyline with Phoebe then becoming the genie, Chris becomes her master, and we see that she's not able to stand up to him in the way that she normally would. So he makes one accidental wish for Leo to forgive him, because Leo's come to the conclusion in this episode that yes, Chris may have good intentions, but his methods are dangerous and they just need to send him back to the future. They know what's going to happen with Wyatt. They can take it from here. And we see that Chris is very upset about this. Phoebe is very upset about it, but he's very like, I'm going to talk to the elders. This is going to happen. So Chris makes this wish that Leo would just get over it as they're arguing back and forth. We know that Chris is always very moody, very loud, and in this episode it actually pays off for him because in that emotional moment he is able to then get Leo to forgive him, which obviously goes a bit too far, as instead of trying to help the sisters, Leo is spending all his time trying to write a letter to Chris in order to prove how sorry he is. And Chris brings up this point of like, oh, I got a lot of those growing up. It's not going to mean very much to me. And this idea that Leo wasn't around for him is introduced, which is actually really sad. We also then see that Chris is trying to get Leo to do this and like, hey, like, what about you and Piper, trying to hint at that. And he's like, oh, like, it's so nice that you care, man. But like, unless there's a miracle, that's not happening. Which then gives Chris the idea that he needs to make another wish. So he pulls Phoebe into the kitchen and she's like, you want to do what? And he's like, come on, like, Mom's all sexed up for the firemen, Dad's in a good mood, like, let's hit him with a whammy. And she's like, we are not making them sleep together. But he does wish for them to sleep together tonight, which Phoebe then used the genie tricksterness to make Piper and Leo just fall asleep, which they later say was an Arabic sleeping potion that Jinny had used on them. So we then have those two unconscious for the rest of the episode, while the other two sisters and Chris are trying to figure out what to do next. Obviously, like I said, Jinny does escape. So then he has to lead her to the other two sisters after she threatens Piper and Leo. And that's when we see that Richard is upset with himself for what he's just done to Paige, wishes Phoebe free, becomes the genie. Jinny gets the bottle in the chaos of their fight, and then wishes for the charmed ones to be dead. When Leo heals Piper, that prevents the wish from coming true because all three of them would have to be dead. So the sisters are now trapped on Earth as spirits. And it's funny because a little bit earlier when it was just Paige and Chris at the house, Chris had revealed to Paige what his two wishes had been. And she's like, oh, like, you're some weird sex offender from the future. And this is one of the highest comedy scenes of the episode. He's like, no, like, they're my parents. And then as spirits, we see Paige and Phoebe then fighting about the fact that Phoebe did not tell her that she had another nephew. We then see that they are able to, as spirits, go to where Jinny is, possess her, and get her to wish herself back into the bottle. We then see that Richard has it. He makes a wish for the charmed ones to be alive again, to put Zanbar back down, which I will say, I don't remember the special effect for that being so bad, but it was absolutely awful in a 2025 context. And then we do see that they are able to kind of put things back to normal. We have our final moments for each of the sisters where, again, Paige and Richard do break up. We see that Chris and Phoebe haven't given up hope yet, and things are on a little bit of a good path for Piper and Leo there. which definitely leaves me very excited for the next episode and where all of this is going from here. Obviously, with Paige and Phoebe now both being in on Chris's secret, I'm definitely interested to see how they might play a role in making sure Piper and Leo do end up hooking up within the time frame needed, or if Chris disappears forever. There's definitely a lot to find out, and yeah, that is all I have for this one, but I hope you'll join me back next time.